Hello everyone, and thank you for clicking on the Literacy Volunteers of Harrison County YouTube channel. We're a nonprofit United Way agency. We would love for you to share these videos with your friends, like them, give them a thumbs up, and subscribe to our channel. Today we're going to look at the last video in the Biology 101 series, and this is lesson 11 on understanding natural selection. It would be more beneficial to you to watch this one after you watch the one on evolution, and that way it will make more sense, the one lesson number 10. But natural selection is driven by the environment, which I mentioned in the other video. One of the central mechanisms of evolutionary change, and it is the process responsible for the evolution of adaptive features. We looked at adaptations, adaptive features. Those are synonymous. Those two things mean the same. There's a non-random difference in reproductive output among replicating organisms, right? That means that you will, each organism produces a specific amount of other organisms. It might be in a continuum, but it's still a specific amount. It's not, you don't have two organisms that of the same species that produce thousands of offspring and others just tens. Okay, it's non-random. Right? So due indirectly to the differences in survival in a particular environment. So environment does drive it, and it drives our heritable characteristics, but it's indirectly driven. It's not directly driven. So that will lead to an increase in those beneficial heritable characteristics. Let's look at exponential growth. Populations have the capacity to increase exponentially. That means when we're looking at 2 to the power of n, if we have one person who marries another person and they have 2 kids, right? And then those 2 kids have 8 kids, whatever, 4 kids, in each one of them. So we increase exponentially. That's a big problem in the globe today, exponential growth. So we're looking at limiting capacity. How much can the globe support, right? So here's an example I just gave you so you can kind of get your mind wrapped around it. Oysters can produce as many as 114 million eggs in just one spawn. That's just one series, right? 114 million. If all of those survive and reproduce, then in 5 generations, there would be more oysters than electrons in the universe. So obviously, they don't survive and reproduce, right? However, most of those offspring that are produced do not survive and therefore don't produce offspring. So this is the limiting capacity to our exponential growth within whatever species that we're looking at, right? We looked a little bit at variation and inheritance, and I wanted to let you know that variation is ubiquitous, right? We find it, ubiquitous means we find it everywhere. Everywhere. So variation doesn't occur just in one species. Every species has its own variants, have their own variants. But that inheritance operates through DNA replication. And if you go back a few videos, we talked about DNA replication, and that's how your DNA makes a copy of itself, right? You go out and you buy a replica of an original painting, right? That's a copy of that original painting. So through replication, and errors in replication cause mutations, changes in genes, right? We talked about those as well. And we also reshuffle those genes, and those give us existing variants, right? So we're changing the genes around a little bit. And when we reshuffle them, that's called recombination. And it is the source of new variation as we change genes, because I told you genes code for proteins, right? And proteins are what make you, right? Universally. So non-random differences in survival and reproduction are another source for a look at natural selection. Darwin noted that some individual organisms possess traits that make them slightly better suited to whatever particular environment. So that means if they're better suited to the environment, they're more likely to survive than organisms with less suitable traits. Okay? So they leave more offspring than their competitors do. That's what you want, right? You want to outlast your competitors. So if you're outlasting your competitors, then your lineage moves on, right? So we have these new genetic variants that occur at random. Random mutations are random. They're not specifically picked for whatever gene they occur on. But the probability of passing that mutation on, that variant, is non-random, and it impacts survival and reproduction positively. When we because the variants are only going to carry on if they're beneficial. We're not going to carry on a variant that's not beneficial. And if we do, that causes lots of problems. So the last thing I want to look at is something called Darwinian Fitness. right? This is biological fitness, and a lot of people get it confused with physical fitness. They're not the same thing. Darwinian fitness, how can we quantify the relationship between genotype, actual genes I've showed you before, phenotype, what you see, survival and reproduction? The only way we quantify those or put those together to give them substantial, data would be Darwinian fitness. That's the most simple measure of total reproductive output of an organism with any genotype, with any gene. We're saying how much of that organism, how much of that gene is put onto the next, right? That's Darwinian fitness. The more offspring, the higher the organism's fitness. So if you have one set of offspring and you have 10, and then you had another that has 20, that person is more Darwinian fit, biologically fit. The more offspring you produce, the more fit you are. So biological fitness does not have to do with physical condition, strength, or stamina. No, that's not biological fitness. That's physical fitness. How long you can go, how far you can jump, how long you can run, blood pressure, all of those things that we've talked about before. No. Biological fitness, how many offspring do you have? How high is your reproductive rate? Traits that make life longer or less difficult are evolutionarily irrelevant unless they also influence reproductive output. So you could have traits that make you live longer, right? And make your life less difficult, but unless you are having a higher output of offspring, we're not going to see them again, right? So that's what we're talking about. They're irrelevant unless they influence reproductive output when we're talking about Darwinian fitness. Traits that enhance net reproduction may increase in frequency over many generations, even if they compromise longevity. Meaning that if they're going to increase in frequency, if we get more of that species, even if they don't live as long. That's what that means. So fitter traits increase in proportion within the population over generations. And you hear people call it survival of the fittest, and that's not really what it is. Excuse me. Adaptation means, literally, when we look at the word, means towards fitness. How physical, physiological, and behavior features that contribute to survival and reproduction over evolutionary time. That's an adaptation. How do they do that? Most new mutations are neutral with respect to survival and reproduction. So therefore, they're irrelevant in terms of natural selection. So we would ignore those mutations. Just a small percent of them are beneficial. So they will increase reproductive rate. That means that they're going to increase over time. The more it increases reproductive rate, the more you're going to see it, right? Because if you have two people that have a less advantageous adaptation, they're not going to pass that on. But if it is advantageous, you're going to pass it on, then your offspring are going to be more abundant because you have an advantageous adaptation to whatever environment it is. The environment's still driving the adaptation. So mutation does not exist to improve fitness. That's not why mutation exists. It's just merely a replication error. The fitness then in turn benefits from this low percentage of mutation, but that's not why. That would be putting the cart before the horse. That's not why mutation exists. Mutation is just a replication error, a base code error, right? So here we have to look at natural selection in terms of reproduction, right? Again, we're looking at sex and food. So reproduction and how well does that environment support that organism. So if you like this, I would like for you to click on the icon below, the bell icon, and you'll be notified when we put up more videos. Give it a thumbs up, and I would like to thank you for joining us today.